All right, I think we're ready to begin. Now, it is my distinct honor to introduce for you here today Hal Abelson and Gerald Sussman, joining us remotely from Boston. And yes, please. Now, they are, of course, the creators of structured interpretation of computer programs, also known as SICP, SICP, or simply the Wizard Book. And I needn't tell you about the enormous impact this work has had on the computer science curriculum, both in the US and elsewhere in the world, and individually on generations of developers, including most of us in this room. So I'm not going to tell you about their work on SICP. I just want to take a moment to tell you about some of the other great work that they're doing. Starting with Hal. So Hal Abelson has been working for decades on making things more open, beginning with the Open Courseware Initiative at MIT, which was, as far as I know, one of the first, or if not the first, such initiative, making education more accessible to people all around the world. He's also worked on making the power of computation more accessible, starting with the Logo project back in the 60s and 70s, and all the way down to the MIT App Inventor project, which he's going to be telling us about today, I believe. And he's also worked on the Creative Commons initiative, which forms the legal basis of making educational materials and things, placing creative works of all kinds in the public domain. So this is all incredibly valuable stuff, and I'm so glad that you're working on this, Hal. And Jerry, in addition to his work on SICP, has also worked on numerous other things. He is, of course, one of the creators, along with Guy Steele, of the Scheme programming language, of which, of course, Racket is a member in that family. And he has also worked on reforming the physics curriculum and attempted to introduce the Scheme programming language into the physics curriculum, specifically into the teaching of classical mechanics and formalizing some of the procedural aspects of classical mechanics. I don't know how much success you've had with this, Jerry, but we'd all be certainly very interested to hear how well Scheme is doing in the physics curriculum. In addition to that, he's also worked on fields too numerous to list, from synthetic biology to working on amateur and professional telescopes. So he really is a polymath and modern day Renaissance man. And I think we are very privileged and honored to have here Hal and Jerry. So please take it away.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you. Hal and I are honored to appear before you, and we also greatly want to congratulate you for doing wonderful work in developing software that's clean and understandable and can help people to, and I think that every software engineer in the world ought to be looking at things like Racket to understand how to do a good job. And that's something I really think. Anyway, I will start out. Let me get my screen shared for you. Here it is. There we go. Okay. I presume you can see that on my screen. So, of course, we are really interested. Hal and I have both been interested for our entire lives in teaching people thinking. We got that idea basically from our teachers, Seymour Papert and Marvin Minsky. Seymour actually wrote a book called Teaching Children Thinking. Okay. And I think the most important thing that they taught us is that programming is a means of expression in the same way that writing your natural language, English, or playing music, or, in fact, doing things like mathematics, all of those are means of expression. And that programming is a new means of expression, and it's very, very powerful, and it's something we should learn about and make sure everybody in the world knows about. Okay? Now, so I'm going to proceed by giving a bit of the philosophy of this stuff. Okay, I started out for me. I suppose I was teaching electrical circuits in 1974. Okay, I was my first faculty teaching, I suppose I was 1973 when I taught E&M, but I was teaching circuits and I was observing, I'm a circuit guy, I'm an old ham radio operator, and I observed that the way in which we taught this stuff was not the way the experts actually deal with circuits. Right? When we teach it, we put up equations, node equations, and things like that. But the fact is that experts hardly ever write any equations at all. How come? Well, the answer is that the things that we teach are the things you could write in English text and small numbers of mathematical equations that could fit on a blackboard. So I decided it was important to write down these things as procedures, write down the things that an actual expert does, and then write it as code that a student can read. And then the idea was if a student can read that code, the student can learn the techniques of an expert. And that's started, and of course I did this originally with Richard Stallman, who was an undergraduate at Harvard at the time, and I hired him to work on things like this with me. Next, in the 1970s, I continued this. I developed a class with Richard Adler, unfortunately deceased. He got killed in an automobile accident, okay? But there were students who learned about electrical circuits and programming. We taught them, this is a 24-unit subject. It was taught by Richard Adler and me, 2 years, one in 78 and one in 79. And we basically, that's twice the size of an MIT class. We taught them how to do electrical circuits and programming by incrementally writing a symbolic electrical circuit analysis system in Lisp. Right?
So Jerry, actually, let me just stop you for a moment. There's an artifact on the screen blocking the titles of the slides.
Sorry, I'll fix that. I will fix that. That's easy. Okay, it's a bug in the Zoom world. Got it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Looks great. Yeah, looks great.
I thought it wasn't there for you, but it might be for me. Anyway, so the next thing to realize, having spent a lot of time thinking about that, I talked a lot with my friend Joel Moses, and we decided that programming is really the abstract version of engineering design. Okay? It's the fact that most of the time you have no idea what you're trying to make. There's a partially defined goal. But in fact, when somebody tries to give you specs, that doesn't make sense. What generally is you figure out what specs you can possibly implement. Okay, it's not like physical systems where you have problems like tolerances, like the parameters have particular values plus minus 5%. Okay. On the other hand, what we are limited by is the fact that we make more complex things this way. We make things that are so humongous, so huge in number of parts that the main problem is control of complexity. And so that's a vision that I got into at that time. Now, right as approximately that time, just after that, Hal and I got together and started teaching this class. And I think the text on this slide is probably the most important piece of text that Hal and I ever wrote. Okay, and I'm going to read it to you slowly. Computer science is not a science, and significance has little to do with computers. The computer revolution is a revolution in the way we think and the way we express what we think. The essence of this change is the emergence of what might best be called procedural epistemology, the study of the structure of knowledge from an imperative point of view, as opposed to the more declarative point of view taken by classical mathematical subjects. Mathematics provides a framework for dealing precisely with notions of what is. Computation provides a framework for just dealing precisely with notions of how to. So this is the idea, is that for the first time in history, we can write recipes, okay, for example, that are hundreds of pages of long and make sense, as opposed to recipes that would have to take 1 page. And therefore, we can explain to students things that couldn't be explained without this kind of structure. So then there was a revelation at that time. And I want to say it actually started earlier. When I was a freshman, I was taught Lisp, probably by Bill Gosper. Okay, we used to go to Chinese restaurants late at night. I was a member of the Minsky's Hackers Group, okay, which is a bunch of undergraduates and others who just loved playing with computers and basically did what Minsky needed done. Okay, and the most important thing there is that over one dinner, I believe Gosper explained to me the eval-apply interpreter. Okay. Now, here's, of course, a very concrete syntax version of it. And you all know that concrete syntax is not the way you want to do things. But in fact, it is the tightest little picture that gives you that's absolutely mechanical. But what's going on is eval takes an expression environment and calls apply with the procedure and its arguments, because it pulls those out of the expression. Okay, apply takes the procedure and the arguments and makes a new environment, and then calls the eval on the body with that environment. That's an important loop. Okay. The amazing thing is that there's a very similar thing, which I learned when I was a freshman about, if this was in my the second term when I was taking E&M, which was that there's Maxwell's equations. And notice the important thing here is the two curl equations. B is the magnetic field. It says the magnetic field is coming from the rate of change of the electric field. And the electric field is coming from, that's E, is coming from the rate of change of the magnetic field. This is very similar to that other idea, okay? And by the way, at the bottom is a conservation of charge, which was discovered by Benjamin Franklin, and Maxwell credits him with that. But in any case, Maxwell had this wonderful combination. He made this manipulation, I suppose, on the same day he wrote down the equations for the first time, although they were not written in this beautiful vector notation. And he ends up with the wave equation, which is a traveling wave. Okay? All of a sudden, let there be light. That was light. And that's beautiful. And to me, the revelation was that these are the same idea. It's dual variables that occur everywhere in physics and in every other kind of engineering I know of. Okay, it's that there are things like force and distance, or momentum and velocity. I said it wrong. Yes, force times distance is energy. Okay, I'm not going to expound on that right now, but that's the idea. Okay. So the important reason for studying programming in general is that there's among other things, amazing intellectual impact that we have on students by teaching them things like that. They get to confront all sorts of things, like, what does Chicago mean? I once had an argument with a philosopher that almost came to a fist fight over the meaning of the word Chicago. What does identical mean? Only a computer programmer understands that two things are identical only if modifying one changes the other. Okay. What is about why are quotations special? The problem of substitution occurs. Okay, if you have John knows that the morning star is Venus, and we all know that the morning star is the evening star, it doesn't mean John knows the evening star is Venus. And there are all sorts of other things like that. There are questions about why if something is raven is black, seeing a black raven is evidence for that, but seeing a white coffee cup is not. Okay? So, but the next challenge is, how do we teach students to think this way? And we have to worry about, again, can the code be written and read by a student as literature of the subject to be taught? That's the thing that I'm thinking about. And there are lots of things like that. Say, Hal and I also taught together a class in signals and systems with Bill Siebert about things like that. Okay, we can't do that right now. Okay, basically we have to get somebody from walking into the room. And we also worry about things like, one thing I think is very important is people make this terrible idea of thinking that you should be ashamed of yourself if you have a bug. That's not reasonable. Bugs are part of the method of getting of making good designs. That's the incremental path to making a good design, is to make something that almost works and then fix it. Okay, so I'm not going to elaborate on that because we don't have enough time today. But I want to say that, of course, there are bugs that don't make sense. Would you like Python is an example of full of gotchas like this. They look at what does this wiggly bracket mean? Is it a set, or is it a dictionary? We're much worse. What about things like the difference between a list and a tuple? In order to make it a tuple, it has to have a comma. Okay, this is the kind of thing that when I learned this stuff, because I had to learn some Python, I lost a half an hour just trying to figure out why my tuple didn't do the right thing. Okay. Anyway, the other important thing is to think that if you can think about using programming as a way of expressing stuff, then take complex, deep stuff. This is advanced classical mechanics, where you're talking about Hamiltonians and Lagrangians and that sort of stuff. and the laws of motion at the level of know there's a theorem for why, for example, the conservation laws are the same as symmetries of the universe. Okay, well, you start teaching that, but the important thing to realize is expressing the methods in a computer language forces them to be unambiguous and computationally effective. The task of formulating a method as a computer executable program and debugging that program is a powerful exercise in the learning process. That's the goal there. And I've also been developing with my friend Jack Wisdom, that was previously involved with Jack Wisdom. We want to understand general relativity. That's not very easy. Okay, the math is usually impressionistically written. It's hard to tell what was actually said. The math is written to be ambiguous in the way, just like, because math is a natural language. Okay, well, but if you transform it into computer programs, then Einstein's field equation is a perfectly clear idea. Okay, and of course you have to fill in all the details, and you do. Okay, so why is programming important? It provides pleasures, they're intellectual pleasures. That's why it's important to teach kids this. Okay, it also causes philosophical contemplation. There are all sorts of eternal questions you have to understand. Debugging is fun, okay, and it's important as a way of making an incremental progress toward getting an answer. There's the pleasure of discovery of good ideas. For example, I'm not going to explain that, but for example, that high order functions and extensible genetic procedures makes automatic differentiation essentially trivial. Okay, and the great thing about math is, well, our impressionistic math, cosine square of theta is cosine theta times cosine theta, but cosine minus 1 theta is not 1 over cosine theta. That should make a little kid in high school really upset, saying there's something wrong. But it's not really wrong. It's a natural language. You have to get around that, and it's nice to be able to say that precisely. And programming makes us that. So I'm almost done. Got one more thing to show you. Here's one more thing, that the most important sentence in the RNRS, in my opinion, is right at the top. Programming languages should be designed not by piling feature upon feature, but by removing the weaknesses and restrictions that make additional features appear necessary. And Marvin Minsky said to me once, anyone can learn Lisp in 1 day, except that if they already know Fortran, it will take 3 days. Okay? So, and of course, if you want to have some fun, there's a book by Chris Hansen and I where we elaborate on better ways to make things very flexible. And finally, I have a plug for one of the most important things of all, that we have to make, in order to make things democratized, as Hal would say, to make it so everybody can access things, and so that we can all learn from everybody else's stuff. We want to write free Libre software that's like GPL, and the books I write, and Hal too, I suppose, is Creative Commons by share alike. Okay, meaning you have to say, yeah, Sussman wrote this, but that's a different thing from you can pass it around, modify it, do what you like. I consider that a moral principle, and I think you should really support the Free Software Foundation. And that's all I have to say. Let me now give this back to Hal.
Give it back.
Okay? Let me unshare. That's my problem. There's a share. Unshare. How long did I take?
Okay. Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm going to be talking about something that complements what Jerry said, which at the root are kind of the same thing, but takes a very different perspective. Let me share and start this.
We didn't develop a food transfer protocol. I would otherwise make tea for everybody.
And is captured in this distinction between not so much thinking, although I'll talk about thinking, but we're now in a world where this has real implications for action. Mm-hmm. I'll talk a little bit about the project I've been doing, which is called MIT App Inventor, but let me start kind of where Jerry started. I showed up at MIT in 1969, which is way after Jerry, but I was lucky enough that almost the first person I ran into when I showed up at MIT was Seymour Papert, who was, of course, a math professor then. And soon after that, Papert wrote this amazing memo, logo memo #1, called Teaching Children Thinking. Number two, which Jerry already mentioned. And what it said was that this was about, as Seymour said, presenting a grander vision of educational technology. But the point is that the technology is something that children themselves learn to manipulate it. Children themselves, right? Not researchers like us, not people in industry, but children themselves. And what did they get out of that? A greater and more articulate mastery of the world, right? A sense of the power of applied knowledge. He didn't talk about really understanding a lot of things. This was really about how children were thinking about themselves as intellectual agents. Papert came to MIT from working at the lab of Jean Piaget, who was great educational psychologist. And Papert formulated an idea about the construction of knowledge called constructionism. Constructionism is a theory that says I create my own knowledge by building artifacts that I can share with people. And the thing that we should realize is that by empowering people to be using these great programming languages, like Lisp and Racket and Scheme and all of that, we are empowering people to construct their own knowledge by this theory called constructionism. Jerry already saw our book. Our book, as Jerry hinted, came directly out of what Seymour was saying. It's about how we are thinking, but even more, how children can think about things and what children can do. Papert was pretty amazingly, together with Marvin Minsky, co-director of the MIT AI lab. And he was also the head of the MIT Logo project, which started in 1968.
That's right.
And our motto there was that computers are for kids. But think a little bit, 1968, 1970 was a really, really long time ago. And the idea that you would take these really powerful machines like our PDP-10, and what you would do is open them up to kids was almost heretical. I mean, people would come into our lab and say something like, "Show me the robots." And there just was not the sense that these enormous devices that we take for granted right now would be things that you'd put in the hands of kids. That was the genesis of Logo. I wrote a book about Logo for the Apple, Logo for a bunch of things, about taking effectively something very, very much like Scheme with a syntax level, and saying, how do you empower kids to be using that? And the buzzword is, Jerry didn't quite say it, is computational thinking. Papert was kind of the first person to popularize this idea of computational thinking. Again, the key word there is thinking. Papert actually didn't call it computational thinking. He called it procedural thinking, which will give you a hint of what's really important in the stuff we're all doing. And we can list what we think is important there. There's ideas like procedures and iteration and recursion and all of this stuff. And a lot of what's going on in the world now, because the world now is kind of caught up with what we were thinking in 1968, which sort of says, gee, this idea of programming and expressing things in programming languages are actually a valuable thing to do in education. And I'm going to say again, that was not there in 1970. It's so long ago that it's hard to remember that. But these days, I want to say we're in a new transition. Something really has happened over the last 2 years, and I want you to appreciate that it's not only a question of thinking. The infrastructure that we have right now that kids can do can actually make a real difference. Not only a difference in their mind and how they think about themselves, but a difference in the world. So what's going on now is we can empower kids to really address authentic challenges and build things that impact their life, their family, their friends, their community, even their city and country. And I'm talking about middle school kids. Just imagine the infrastructure we built right now is so powerful that even kids have this ability. That's something that hasn't happened until a couple of years ago, and people still don't appreciate it. That anyone, in particular kids, can create original apps that have societal impact, even if they have no technical training beyond elementary school. Even young kids, they can do this all over the world and even in the poorest communities. So let me show you a couple of examples of what that's like. Dharavi is one of the largest slums in Asia. It's outside of Mumbai. It has about 1 million people in it. The average income is about $50 a month. Right, so Dharavi's, again, a major slum. Dharavi is also home to the the Dharavi tech girls. And what they do is they create applications and software to improve the lives of the other people in Dharavi, right? Kids, these are kids 13 to 16, right? Dharavi girls can change. And the thing I want you to realize is kids these days can do that. So an example of one of the things they did is they built an app that's called Pani, which means water in their language, that schedules their family's time in the community water distribution plant. And of course, that's really meaningful to them because that avoids fights and avoids arguments. People don't have to go there all day to wait. And of course, for those, if you're a 13-year-old girl, that's meaningful for you because who's your family going to send to hang out at the water distribution plant and be in the fights? So this is an immediately relevant thing that they can do. And what it shows, that's computational action because children, even in the poorest communities, can make things that improve the lives for people around them. Let me show you another example. The Eastern European country of Moldova has been in the news because of the threats from Russia. But outside of threats from Russia, Moldova also has a problem with hepatitis B. And there's an app that was done by, I think, 3 high school girls in Moldova that says, go find a good source of water. Take a picture of it with your mobile phone. Fill out some comments. There are things you can fill out like the pump handle here is broken or the quality of the water. And then what they can do is they can take that database, they can take that information and add it to Google Maps. And what does that do? That means that anyone in Moldova, anyone in the world now has a resource where they can help find good sources of water. Right? That's not a thing that was in everybody's head even 5 years ago. Right? That kids can make something that has national impact. Right? So even children can create valuable resources that have nationwide scope or even worldwide scope. And that should be in our consciousness when we think about why we're doing what we're doing. We're empowering everybody, even children, to do this thing. Here's another example from the US in Kentucky. A very, very simple app. Any of you could make this. It's the thing that schedules, that lists that I take my medication. But the important part is that was done by a 4th grade girl who was thinking about her grandfather who has Alzheimer's. And she said, here's something that would really improve the life of my grandfather. And I view this thing that I'm doing as a tribute to my grandfather. Right, so this is not that it's a great app, it's how that girl feels about her own sense of empowerment and ability to do things in this world of computation. So again, even children can draw on their personal experiences to make life better for others and to think about their own sense of power. Here's another one that comes from Hong Kong. There's a thing called Dementia Care Companion. There's a lot of concern in Hong Kong about the elderly. And this is the kind of app that you'd expect somebody to have to help them. It has locator functions and alarms and tips. And what's really cool about it that I never would have thought of in this thing, I don't know how many of you would have thought of it, it has instructions, and the instructions are spoken in the voices of the person's family member. I just thought that was wild. It never would have occurred to me. And I said, wow, that would occur to a 5th grade kid, but not to me. And it's an example of how by empowering kids to do things, they have a different perspective on life, and often they make things that are better than we, the professionals, would be thinking about. So again, that's computational action. And it's about improving the quality of life for family members, but also improving how you think of your own ability to be effective in this world that we're all creating. Final one, here's a final one. This is an app that was actually done by MIT students that it reads these urine sample strips and then basically uses some AI to read what's on the strip and do an interpretation of the diagnosis. And there it is being tested in a village in Nicaragua. So this can happen all over the world. And again, even students can make breakthrough medical applications that have worldwide implications. This all works. I should mention this stuff happens on our MIT server, App Inventor server, which actually runs out of the lab in this building. We have 1 million users a month, 70,000 a day, and you can see a breakdown there. About a quarter in the US, Taiwan and Mexico and Spain, and Spain are big users, but it really is all over the world, almost 200 countries. And that's what we're building, and that's the ability that we have to empower people and not only think about the great ideas that come from being able to do programming and building and computation, but the great ways that you can think about yourself doing this. Here's some very recent scopes. There are 10 million people who've used this system from almost 195, almost 200 countries, of which 47%, almost half, are in the developing world. This is not a thing about rich countries only. This is a worldwide phenomenon, and it's the kind of thing that we are making possible. So again, let me go back to Seymour. Teaching Children Thinking by Seymour, who at the same time he was starting the MIT AI lab and thinking about all this stuff, was creating the Logo project. And what it was about is not only ideas, which are incredible, Jerry spoke about that, but it's about how kids and everyone can think about empowering themselves through this technology we're building. Thanks. Okay.
Why don't you unshare?
Let me unshare here. Okay.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Alan Jerry. So, of course, we have time for questions. We have quite a long discussion section. So
Sit down.
please feel free to come to me. I'll
Sit
walk
down
along
here.
the aisles. Just come up to me if you have anything you'd like to discuss with Alan Jerry. I guess I'll just start by asking you this. Is Scheme still your language of choice? And is your favorite dialect of Scheme Racket?
That's for me?
For either of you, both of you.
Well, first of all, if we have an echo, what's going on here? Somebody's, mine's turned off.
Mine's muted too. Hold on a second.
Both of mine are muted. Something is making it red. Well, we'll solve the technical problem first. Okay. This is not written in Scheme.
Yeah, mine's muted.
I think mine is muted also. In fact, so somebody else has got a problem here. Somebody has
Okay. It seems like
laptop turned
I think if
on.
I'm too close to the speakers, it might be picking it up.
Okay,
Okay, anyway,
anyway,
for me, I will
It's around.
say that I use Scheme more than anything else. The reasons I use MIT GNU Scheme is not because it was done by my group, although it helps. But the main reason is because I know so much about its insides that I can fix it and change it very rapidly, okay, to do what I like. Okay, that's one thing. But the other nice thing about it is it's very good at compiling numerical procedures into very serious numerical code for an x86, okay? If I were starting again, I'm going to say something nasty. If I were starting again, making the stuff for SICM, I would probably be using Julia, okay? Which is basically a scheme with syntax, which I hate syntax. I'd much rather use Lisp syntax. But I'd be using Julia because it's even better at numerical crunching on very, very large scales. And many of the things I do require large numerical crunches. I like to build, I like to build things that do celestial mechanics and things like that. Racket's a wonderful thing, but it has one problem for me. It doesn't play well with my most favorite interface in the world, which is Emacs. By contrast, I know it does have there's an Emacs interface, but when I've tried it, it hasn't played well with Emacs, and I live in Emacs. I hardly touch the computer doing anything else except with Emacs.
Emacs is very popular in this community, and you should try the latest Racket mode, which is authored by Greg Hendershot, and it's really good. It's really good.
I want to do that. I haven't had the time. Please send me email explaining.
You can count on it. You can count on. Everyone's going to send you an email about this.
Okay, fine. Okay, because I basically the real thing I love is Emacs. Okay.
While we're waiting on more questions, I'd also like to mention one thing, which is when I was a kid, I moved to a new town, which was Mumbai. At the time, it was called Bombay. And I was a kid. I was 10, and I didn't have any friends there, and I was in this big new town. And every day, I used to walk a few blocks to get to my school bus, which would pick me up and take me to my school, which was like 15 miles away. It was this huge, enormous, big experience for a little kid. And the thing is, every day in the morning, I would walk these 4 blocks from my house to the bus stop, and I would be surrounded by people who didn't have arms, who didn't have legs, and they would just have their hands out and say, and then I was this little kid faced with the daily choice of what to do with the 10 rupees lunch money that I had in my pocket. Should I give it to them, one of these people, or should I eat my breakfast, So it was a very interesting, formative experience for me. And I mention it because I didn't know it at the time, but it wasn't something that was everywhere in Mumbai at the time. I happened to be living on the fringes of Dharavi, which is the community that you mentioned. So it's incredible that this is a community that, the world has forgotten. The man doesn't care about them. And you're empowering the kids and the community members there to take matters into their own hands and fix these problems. So that's wonderful. Just wanted to say that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thanks for a great talk. I'm Sam Tobin-Hochstadt. One thing that's really distinctive about SICP is the way that it's been used for self-study and self-education by so many people around the world. But also it's been a popular textbook used in lots of places. I used it as an undergraduate. So can you talk a little bit about how you think about writing a book that's both useful for people trying to learn something on their own with maybe nothing more than a book that they checked out from the library, and also writing a book that talented educators such as yourself can teach from?
I'm not sure we started that book based on notes on a course that we taught at MIT. Mm-hmm. And the thing that we forced ourselves to do in this course is to really focus on the ideas. So that's not true in every course that you teach, but here we were trying to talk about fundamental ideas to some really bright people who were MIT beginning students and freshmen. But we didn't try to clutter it up with a lot of details. So the book tries to be very clear about what are the basic ideas. And I think, and also we had some really great ideas to do on. We came out of the culture of the MIT AI lab, where I guess the key idea we talk about was abstraction. And you didn't see that in a lot of other courses. Even now, if you look at most programming book about most languages, they're going to start by telling you what the primitive data types of the language are. Right? Pick up any book and you'll see that in the beginning. And what we start by saying, what are the abstractions and the means of combination in that, which is somewhat a higher level and I think clearer. And we certainly were very conscious of taking that perspective when we wrote the book. And I like to think that's one of the reasons why people are able to learn from it and people like it.
I think there's another thing going on here, which is very interesting, which has to do with, I believe that the way we teach mathematics in general, of which I think of programming as a kind of mathematical thing also, but meaning it's symbolic reasoning and things like that. We teach mathematics incorrectly. We teach it as a set of skills. Okay, manipulate this expression, manipulate that expression, poke this thing, solve a quadratic equation, junk like that. We don't teach it as a language. We don't teach it look, when I read a sentence of English, I do not look at the characters out of which it's made. I hardly see the characters. I rarely see even the words. What I'm seeing is a meaning. And I know after I'm 77 years old and I've done a lot of math, and I can tell you, I look at a differential equation, it's a sentence, okay? And it's a sentence that tells me how something moves. And I think about the motion, not about the characters in that sentence, okay? And I think that's a bug. It's a bug that we teach math and programming and stuff like that way. The wonderful thing about SICP is we don't teach people the scheme. We start speaking it the same way a little child learns to speak and listen to his parents and friends talking together. David, stop talking. Okay. David came in and made a mistake. Yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, I think we have one here. I'm William Bowman from University of British Columbia. So I really appreciate the philosophy underlying SICP, that computer science is really a means of expressing yourself. And that's how I think about programming languages in general. But particularly because a lot of this work came out of AI, and we're now facing a new form of AI. One of the things I struggle with when talking to new students is they think this means of expressing yourself is dead. Now we can express ourselves in natural language and all programming will be solved in natural language, which I obviously disagree with. But I'm curious about your take on this, or how you kind of address this in the new generation of students who don't see expressing yourselves in code in the same way.
Yeah,
Oops, you turned on your, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked, because I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think we all need to think about that a lot, because our first reaction is going to be to resist it and say this is some fantasy of the marketing people and startup people. But the idea, you'll find some very smart people who say, gosh, the appropriate programming language right now is natural language. And we don't want to dismiss that out of hand. And if it doesn't work right now, look at how AI is evolving and how you can interact with things and correct them. So we're playing with that, again, thinking about can primary school students express themselves in that. But I'm glad you answered it. I think it's a very, very serious question. We're thinking about this at MIT. Should universities be teaching programming at all? Or is there some more deeper fundamental thing that is not really about the syntax of a programming language, but more deeply the ideas that we think about in a programming language, whether or not they're expressed in the form of a programming language or a natural language? So I don't have an answer to that, but certainly I'm glad you asked, because we all should be thinking about that very, very seriously.
And I'm worried about it too, but I'm worried about it from the point of view of, we've had the same kind of thing with mathematics, okay? Mathematics, of course, it persists. And the reason why it persists is because you can't say in natural language some of the things you can say in mathematical expressions. And that it's very hard to imagine saying Maxwell's equations and its consequences without being able to do that kind of writing and reading. So there are values to different ways of expressing oneself. As again, Minsky would say, if you don't understand something 5 different ways, you don't understand it. So the fact that one kind of expression is currently becoming more dominant again in the computation world doesn't worry me, because all of the ways of expression will be necessary.
Hi, I'm Greg from a student at the University of Washington. So you've mentioned difference between programming and mathematics several times. My question is, how do you feel about proof assistants such as the Lean programming language or proof assistant?
I don't have much to say about that.
I can say one thing, it's great. It's wonderful that there are such things. Okay, I want to be very careful about that. Being able to, proofs are good, okay, and everybody does them, even in their heads when they're writing programs. There are cases where it's essential that something be true and correct. For example, a garbage collector. But that's a small program. Okay, it's a one-page thing. If you that isn't right, you can't debug the system, because you've thrown away the information. You clear your memory or something. But the honest answer is that in order to use a proof assistant or anything like that, you have to have a specification. And some of engineering, yes, you can specify something. You start with a specification and you develop an application or a mechanism. I'm thinking about electrical circuits or whatever. It doesn't matter. Signal processing systems, things like that. Other times, in again the same subjects, electrical circuits, you figure out what you can build. As a consequence of that, you figure out what specs you can achieve. In other words, you're doing exploratory engineering, okay? And in that case, I don't think it works very well to try to group proofs, because you have no idea what you're trying to achieve until you've achieved it. Okay? A beautiful example of this is it's easy to specify that a chess program plays legitimate legal chess. It's very hard to say what it means to play good chess. Okay, does that help you? Is that a reasonable answer to that, Hal? Yeah.
Any other questions? Let's see. I guess you mentioned how you'd like to see Scheme as.
Can you be a little louder?
Oh, yes.
You.
Let me get away from
Yeah.
the speakers.
Yeah.
You mentioned.
Yeah. Clark, I'd like to hear you a little louder. Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned that you'd like to see Scheme as a way to describe formal mathematical language more precisely. Do you see room for other DSLs, domain-specific language? Excuse me, that might be more appropriate for certain fields in mathematics in general? Or yeah, how do you see that working out?
Well, I'm trying to think of an example of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, because you mentioned in other places how mathematical formalism itself is kind of a language, and in many cases it isn't precise enough or explicit enough, whereas Scheme is. So could there be cases where we could have similarly explicit languages for certain subfields that are also, not necessarily Scheme, could be something else?
Sure. Well, there are important things that we don't have, okay, that are essentially, look, when I'm thinking about some mathematical system, okay, I'm often thinking in terms of pictures. Okay? If I'm looking at a topology problem, okay, then I'm drawing little open sets, things like that. And I'm also drawing commutative diagrams, okay? And I'm doing that in my head, maybe on the chalkboard. I like chalk, I don't like whiteboards, okay? So I'm drawing these pictures and I'm reusing my visual system to help do the reasoning. We don't have very good interfaces for describing that kind of stuff in appropriate for doing computational work. So for example, okay, I'm imagining, supposing someone says, oh, somebody's telling you the time is running over. Yeah. Okay. Okay. But supposing someone says there is a continuous function between two topological spaces. I'm immediately seeing a picture of two blobs, and I see for every open set in the target, there is an open set in the source. Okay, it's a picture, you see. And how do I capture that? The mind's eye. Okay, and that's not just good for math; it's for everything. We don't have that kind of flavorful language for describing things that are essentially spatial and that depend upon our visual systems to do a lot of the hard work.
At the same time, there's a lot of work going on in generative AI that's creating those kinds of diagrams.
Yes.
From pictures and things. So don't knock that. That could
no, I didn't knock it at all.
That could easily exist in a couple of years.
Yeah, I hope so. Yes.
Makes sense. We have some questions on the live stream. Well, first a comment. Without a doubt, the SICP book has had a lasting impact on how we think about programming. So, of course. Looking back, what are your reflections on the book's influence, and what, if anything, would you change or add to it today?
Well, even after we did it, we didn't do anything very much. We never did anything with types because we sort of don't like that sort of thing. We didn't do really anything with classes. Our chapter 3 in SICP was one of the first things that started thinking about object-oriented programming. So we talked about that, but we didn't talk about classes and the way you organize things like that. So I would think if we, even shortly after the book was published, we said, boy, we didn't talk about that very much. So I'd certainly be talking about that as an organization, as a way of organizing ideas. So that's the most obvious first one. But since then, there are lots and lots of things that we could talk about. We've said that book says nothing about user interactions, right? If you learn SICP, you just don't think about user interactions at all. And those are becoming even more important than they were. So there's a lot of stuff that if we were doing this again, we would put in.
Well, I would want to say that I'd be careful not to put too much into one bucket. What I hate is books that are 1,000 pages and cover everything. Right? But it seems to me very important that what we did was a good kernel. Okay, if somebody wants another book, I think, or if we wanted to write another book on this stuff, we would want to write a book about what Hal just said. But I wouldn't want to say that that's equivalent in the sense for a kernel thing. I think what we have there is good as it could be. That's why we never did any further modification to it. So yes, there are things that we didn't talk about, but again, kitchen sink books drive me nuts.
That's very fair. That was a comment from Gabby Corona. We have another comment from Hunan. So cool to see the goats. SICP is a book I return to for inspiration and enlightenment. Grateful to Brian Harvey, whom I believe is the professor at UC Berkeley, for opening this world to us students.
That's right.
And there are two questions that are closely related. One from Gabby Corona and one from Armin K. What is the future of MIT scheme? In my view, it's the only scheme done right. And the related question, what is your hope for the future of scheme languages? Ooh, shots fired.
I don't think scheme language matters much at all. Okay, I think that what matters is the ideas that are expressed. I put what I thought was the most important thing is what I said in the when pointing at the R4RS or RNRS statement, that the most important thing is to not to remove features, okay, and keep the language very simple, so that the only features that are actually there are the ones that are needed. Okay, it's making something very complicated is a bad idea. Now, MIT scheme has the problem that the maintenance of it is by a tiny committee. Okay? Basically, a few people headed by Chris Hansen. Okay? That's not good. So it can't last forever. Okay. Then again, I can't last forever. I'm 77 years old. Okay. And I don't really care very much about that programming language or system, except for the fact that I use it a lot. Okay? It works well. It works extremely well, and it has some amazing features that most don't have. But the real story is that the language, what matters is what is the ideas. Okay? And I hope that the ideas survive. And I think the ideas are mostly the ones that come from the original Lisp, way back from the time of John McCarthy and his students. Okay, it's not me. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to underline what Jerry said about the key thing being the ideas, not really the syntax and the language in which they're expressed. And going back to what we were saying before, it might be that the appropriate way to be expressing those ideas is going to be natural language. I don't know, but there's certainly a lot of people working on that.
I think natural language is not dense enough to write very complex things like programming languages. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. The nice thing is like when people try to make graphical interfaces to programming languages, okay, there's not enough space. The reason why designs of large electrical systems are generally most expressed in text, not in textual descriptions like design languages. I forget the names of some of them, but right now, you draw the schematic diagrams only for little parts because you can't make a schematic diagram big enough, okay, physically that a person can look at. And the reason why text is so dense, okay, with a formal textual language is a powerful thing, and that can't go away.
We have a question here.
Jason Heeman, Seton Hall. I wanted to ask a follow-up. That design philosophy that you described, that I think so many of us respect, doesn't seem like the foundational design to Python, and yet MIT's gone that direction for a course that I know you both love very much. Why is that the right thing to have done?
It's complicated. Okay, I think the answer is not that Python is in some sense a better language. I think it's a much worse language than the scheme, because partly because its complexity and in particular its inconsistencies in its syntax make it harder for students to learn, which means the amount of time wasted on learning the syntactic structure that could be going into teaching ideas is, I've taught it, so I've seen that. Okay, that's a real drag. On the other hand, there is one special thing that matters, okay, which is that it's got access, automatic access to everything in the C library, basically, because of the huge number of interfaces that were built by people all over the world. Okay, that was partly because of, I suppose that was partly because of the fact that it got adopted by Google early. Now, engineering has a tension in it that's always been there since the beginning of time. It's the tension between the applications that are desired and what basically industry wants the engineers to be, what they want them to know when they graduate or they go in for an internship, for example, okay? Or versus what we call engineering science, which is the foundational material. That tension is a pendulum that goes back and forth over time. When I was beginning undergraduate, although I was in the math department, the electrical engineering material was mostly about rotating machines, and about how to make magnetic field, optimize coils to make magnetic fields right and things like that. Okay, that's what industry wanted. Okay, then there was a revolution started by, I suppose, people like Gordon Brown and some other powerful people, Ernie Gilliman and things like that, which was called engineering science. And then there were great textbooks written on that by people like Amar Bose and Ken Stevens on electrical circuits. And that was dominant for a while. And then it goes back, all of a sudden, CMOS became so important that became part of the introductory curriculum, even though it actually is very distracting because bipolars are easier to work with from an intellectual point of view. Okay? And what happens is that there's this fight between those two things. Right now, every student wants to have preparation so that when that next summer they're going to get a $10,000 a month job from Google or something like that, or Facebook or whatever. Okay, that's a pressure. That pressure is dominant right now. On the other hand, when Hal and I were beginning with SICP, the engineering science part was dominant, partly because people like Amar Bose and later Bill Siebert and people like that. So it's a historical thing. It's always been like that, and I expect it will always be. Is that right, Hal?
Well, I think what's going on is there's this tension between wanting to be clear and minimalistic. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the philosophy that is in Scheme. Really about what are the fundamental ideas and do that, versus the world is now getting enormous in terms of what people want to do. So one of the things that Scheme does not have, at least in the way we did it, Scheme does not have the include statement, which is critical to the way people are doing Python right now. Right? So when you're first learning, the question is, do you want to have the fundamental things so you can construct what's going on, or do you want to sort of say there's this enormous world with millions and millions of capabilities, and I can simply put them into my system? And that's the tension that's going on, and that's a really important kind of pedagogical tension for those of us who are teaching things.
And that's also true, right?
Right. So I don't know where that ends up, but it's a real tension that's there.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're celebrating 40 years of magic, I also want to bring it back to the book for a moment. I think it's Patrick Winston at MIT who's fond of saying that in order to understand something, you need to understand it at the level of its presentation and also one level below. So with that in mind, when you were writing the book, how did you do that? And are there any fun anecdotes that you'd like to share about your time writing the book?
Well, I mean, the critical thing for us,
You got yourself.
and the critical thing for us is we wrote this out of teaching.
That's right.
That book was the third revision of notes that we had put out for the course.
Right.
So anything that went into that book started out by having to be something that could be explained to students. And that really dictates the style of the thing. It made it partly minimalistic and partly us choosing to really say you have to explain stuff. And Patrick is absolutely right about that.
And indeed, that's, again, historically appropriate. Other books that I learned from, for example, the Bose-Stevens electrical circuits book, okay, which is it's called Introductory Network Theory or something, is an example of a book that was written by Bose because he was teaching the introductory circuits class, and he was writing down his ideas of how you teach that stuff. I certainly, the stuff I've done with Jack Wisdom is exactly the same thing. We taught the class for many years before we wrote a book on advanced classical mechanics, analytical mechanics. So it's the idea that this is what we tell students. Now we have to be very precise and write it down very, very carefully so that we're capturing those ideas.
Right. Any other questions? I think we have a caller who'd like to join. Remote caller. Caller 7. Well, I guess we'll wait for them, but in the meantime,
Oops, we have a meeting. Hold on.
We're in the middle
surprise.
of this lecture.
We're in the middle of it. Okay, we're having people coming in with a party.
You guys can come in but say hi to everybody because we're in the middle of giving a
Yeah,
lecture.
we're having a party.
Hi, everybody.
What's this party about?
It's for you.
You guys. For you guys.
hey,
Okay.
surprise!
Well, we've been kicking them out all day. Okay. Sorry, everybody, come in. Okay. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, all you guys, we certainly had no idea this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have gifts.
Well,
Thank you.
that is a wonderful community you have there because they organize this in a few
Thank
days.
you, thank you.
And I
Okay,
believe
we'll find out what it is.
Yeah. You should open them.
Yes.
You should
yes.
open them, they're very cool.
Okay, to figure out how to open these without damaging these.
They're
that's
very,
good.
they're
Good
unfortunately
angle,
very
yeah.
well wrapped.
Okay, we'll have to figure this out.
They're very well
Oh, I see the method. Here's the method. I found it. I found the key. Okay. Sorry, everybody.
Yes.
We were talking to the people. By the way, I hope everybody there is enjoying this discussion.
yeah, no, of course. These are all part of the conspiracy,
Well
so
done.
we're very much enjoying this.
Somebody's good
And
at
actually, the person who's holding the cell phone, is it possible to go behind?
Thank
Somebody
you.
have a knife?
Oh, it's a goodie. Yes, I'll open yours.
Open mine.
It's
Do you
a
need help?
40 years of magic by RacketCon.
Oh, man.
Oh, a thing from RacketCon.
Yes, from Racket.
Thank you, everybody, whatever it is. Okay,
It's a music box.
a music box.
House
Okay,
is kind of tight.
Oh, no.
we had no idea this was going to happen at all. Let's see what it plays.
Oh, no, you need to put the.
Oh, it's got a roll in it. I see. I understand. Okay, thank
No, no,
you.
Jared, it's this one. That one,
Problem
that
solved.
one I think is if you want to make your own music.
Of course. Well, I used to punch cards, and I used to punch actually paper tape way back in the beginning.
Oh,
That's what we
fantastic.
were counting on.
Wait, oh, you
Yeah,
stick it this
And
way.
then
I see.
wind the thing
Got
and
it,
it'll go
got
through.
it. Got it. Thank you.
Oh.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
You gotta put the tape in.
Oh, there's tape, Hal.
Here's a-
There it is.
You gotta put
Thank
this in.
you.
I got it, what?
You gotta put
Wonderful.
this in.
Oh, I gotta put it in.
Put it in there
Here.
in the,
Like feed it
Yeah,
into the
put one in.
hole.
Oh, in
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
it's an old, it's like a punch card.
Well, that's an amazing outcome that we didn't expect.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Hal,
And here's
you
what-
got started in computers with a summer job with paper,
Fantastic.
punch
And a
paper
whole
tape,
roll of
right?
blank tape, you can make your own, if you wanna
Now,
make your own music.
yes, I should tell you, by the way, that this brings back memories of punching tapes for the PDP-6 before we had anything with punch paper tape. Okay, way back in 1964. When the PDP-6 had no software on it, and we had to have a loader. The loader would read a paper tape.
Can you show the
Okay.
tape to the camera so that the audience here can see what you're
Oh, how
talking
wonderful.
That's the
box.
Oh, the tape.
Tape. Here's, yes. Oh, here's a piece of paper tape with holes in it.
Maybe sign that you should.
Yeah, I can,
Yeah.
here.
Ah,
Oh, yeah.
See?
Yeah.
See it.
Okay, paper tape with holes in it.
Yeah.
Okay?
about. You got
And
it?
I certainly have punched paper tape.
Now you have more.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very nice.
You have your very own music box interpreters, so go
Okay,
wild.
well, now we have to run a program to run a little machine that runs the paper cake punch.
Sorry for the bloopers in between.
That's all right. No, that's fine, that's fine.
A little
Okay,
technical.
that's all right. Okay, so is there anything else anybody wants to ask or talk about?
No, I think that's it. You all
Okay.
can feel free to continue with the revelry and, watch on the live stream if you want. It'll still be streaming on con.racketlang.org. And thank you so much, Hal and Jerry, for joining us. Congratulations
Okay.
again, 40 years of magic.
Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, and it was fun.